Howdy, my name is Franklin Fitzgerald, and I'd like to introduce our disease, Rickettsia phillipi, which is formerly known as Rickettsia 364D, and its vector, the Pacific coast tick, also known as Dermacentor occidentalis. And its primary location where they inhabit is Rickettsia phillipi is the pathogen for the Pacific coast tick fever, and it falls under the order Rickettsialis, the family Rickettsia. It is an obligate intracellular gram-negative bacteria, and obligate intracellular means that the bacteria cannot live outside of a host cell. So this means it can't be grown in an artificial media, and if it's in a laboratory, it would require a viable eukaryotic host cell, like a cell culture or an embryonated egg. So Rickettsia phillipi falls under the spotted fever group Rickettsia that causes diseases in humans. It has been detected in up to 11% of these ticks from 8 different counties in California. And now it's recognized as causing ester-associated illnesses. So how does the vector acquire the pathogen? Rickettsia phillipi gets into the tick through the consumption of blood of an infected animal. And these animals get infected through eating infected food. Additionally, male ticks can transfer Rickettsia phillipi to females during the mating process. And so there are 2 barriers to this. One is that the bacteria is non-motile, which means it's not capable of movement. Second, as I discussed earlier, it's an obligate intracellular bacteria, which means it can only survive inside the cells. And this is because it cannot make 2 important energetic compounds. One is NAD+, the second is coenzyme A. So the only way for the vector to get infected with Rickettsia phillipi is to bite a host that's already infected. How does the vector transmit the pathogen? Well, Dermacentor occidentalis must be attached to the skin for at least 4 to 6 hours after bite before it can infect a person. And a person can also become infected if crushed tissues or feces from the tick enter a break in the skin or mucous membranes. And this is why it's important to wash your hands and the bite site with soap and water after removing a tick, and apply an antiseptic to the bite site. So what are some barriers or some preventative methods that will prevent the pathogen from passing in order to be transmitted into the host? So 1, you can actively engage in tick checks after being outside. Use an EPA-registered repellent for use against ticks. Repellents that contain at least 20% DEET. They will repel ticks and can be applied to the skin and clothing. Always apply permethrin to clothing, and that'll kill ticks. And also keep pets on a veterinarian-recommended tick bite prevention medication. And finally, shower or bathe as soon as possible after returning from a tick habitat or a wooded area or brush areas.
Let's talk about the life cycle of Dermacentor occidentalis, or the Pacific coast ticks. Eggs are laid in the fall, about 3 weeks after the engorged adult female drops off the host. It takes about 1 month to hatch into 6-legged larvae. The larvae wait out the winter, and in the spring and summer, they will find their first host. Now, peak activity for this species and the larva stage is actually in July, but they will start being active in spring. Their first host is usually a small rodent, and this is things like field mice, moles, voles, etc. They will feed for 3 to 4 days. It takes them about 2 weeks to develop off of the host, and they molt into 8-legged nymphs. This molting happens at the beginning of fall, and in the nymph stage, they wait out the winter. In the spring, usually early spring, they will find their second host, and this is a rodent or lagomorph, and lagomorphs are creatures like rabbits and hares. Actually, nymphs quest about 0 to 5 inches off the ground, and they don't go any higher than that. So those small mammals are going to be the key hosts for them. They feed for about 4 to 6 days. Then they detach, where they overwinter into adults. And the transition takes about 15 to 25 days to adulthood. So as adults in the spring, but they can be active all year, but more particularly in the cold months of the spring. they will find their third host. They prefer cattle, horses, and deer, but they will feed on humans. Males have a significantly shorter female feeding time than the females, and this is to initiate spermatogenesis. Females feed for about 6 to 10 days before they drop off and lay their eggs, and that brings us back to the beginning of the cycle. So this is a 2 to 3 year long life cycle, and the most ideal conditions, it would take 2 years to complete the life cycle, but generally it takes closer to 3 years. And if you noticed, all of the hosts are mammalian. They do not feed on reptiles or avian hosts. Now, this species is found in shrublands and chaparrals. They actually get their common name from the area in which it resides. Their common name is the Pacific coast tick, and they reside in southwestern Oregon, California, and northern Baja, Mexico. Now, these shrublands and chaparrals, the vegetation is dominated by shrubs, grasses, and herbs. Majority of the vegetation is low and close to the ground, and if you remember, the nymph stage only quests about 5 inches maximum from the ground, so this is really beneficial to the species to be living in these habitats. Now, this habitat is dry and hot in the summer, but it is actually damp and cool in the winter, which allows for easier overwintering. About 98% of the tick's life is actually spent in the environment and not on the host. So if you look at these two images, the top one is a shrubland in Oregon, and the bottom one is a shrubland chaparral in California. And you'll also note that there's trails in that image because ticks really, really prefer these trails. Now, this tick is actually the most common tick in California, but it is often mistaken for other Dermacentor other species in the Dermacentor genus. Now, here's the infographic that was completed. The most notable thing on this infographic is the life cycle, which I previously discussed. So this is what the adult male and female looks like. Then you'll move down to the right to the eggs. To the right again, you'll see the larva and the associated hosts. To the left, you'll see the nymph and their associated hosts. Now you note that the squirrel is there because squirrel is the most preferred host for the nymph stage of the species, and then you'll be right back up to the adult males and females. You'll also notice that there's a map pointing out in the United States where this species is most likely to reside.
R. phillipi, formerly known as Rickettsia 364D, causes the disease commonly known as Pacific Coast tick fever. There are several generalized symptoms associated with this disease, such as fever, headache, rash, muscle aches, and the development of a prominent scab at the bite site known as an eschar. Overall, the symptoms of this illness can usually be described as mild. The traditional spotted fever rash that is seen in related diseases such as Rocky Mountain spotted fever is not typically seen in Pacific Coast tick fever, but has been seen to occur in a rare number of cases. As far as diagnosis and treatment of Pacific Coast tick fever is concerned, the associated mild illness that often means that the disease goes undiagnosed. Pacific Coast tick fever is not known to be life-threatening and often resolves itself over time. When medical care is sought, it can be difficult to distinguish Pacific Coast tick fever from other spotted fevers. However, blood tests may be taken to identify a general spotted fever infection, and doxycycline can be prescribed. Doxycycline is the most commonly recommended antibiotic treatment for all spotted fevers.
Next, we will be going into the transmission cycle of our pathogen. Our pathogen is Rickettsia phillipi, which is an obligate intracellular bacillus bacteria. It was formerly known as Rickettsia 364D and causes the disease that has unofficially been named Pacific Coast tick fever. This pathogen is vectored by the tick Dermacentor occidentalis, or otherwise known as the Pacific Coast tick. This tick is also the reservoir host for this pathogen, in addition to being the vector. The tick first acquires the bacteria from a blood meal of an infected host, the Pacific Coast tick, and therefore the pathogen Rickettsia phillipi can be found throughout California, along the coast of Oregon, or even south into Mexico. It is mainly found in shrubland and chaparral, especially along hiking trails. When an infected tick bites a susceptible host, the pathogen is transferred to this host through the tick's saliva. Susceptible hosts are squirrels and other small rodents, horses, cattle, deer, and humans. Once inside the host, the bacteria spreads throughout the body and the bloodstream. It mainly targets endothelial tissue and sometimes vascular smooth muscle cells. It enters target cells and reproduces asexually through binary fission. It does this in the cytosol of the target cells. This will ultimately make more of the pathogen and destroy the target cell. A common sign of this infected endothelial tissue is an eschar on the host skin, which picture is depicted on the infographic there. To exit the host, the bacteria needs to be picked up again by another Pacific Coast tick. From there, the tick can go and infect another susceptible host. So that is our transmission cycle of Rickettsia phillipi.
So there are certain things you can do to protect yourself against Rickettsia phillipi. Before going outside, you should treat your clothing and gear with tick repellent. This includes products that contain 0.5% permethrin or DEET. In addition to using tick repellent, long pants and long sleeve shirts, light in color, should be worn. Tucking your pants into your socks is also beneficial and can prevent a tick from crawling under your clothing. You should always know where to expect ticks, so you know what to avoid. Ticks live in grassy, brushy, or wooded areas. When walking on trails, you should make sure to only walk in the center and avoid these brushy, woody areas tall with grass and leaf litter. After coming back inside, you should check your clothes for ticks. Ticks may have been carried into the house on your clothing. Any ticks that are found should be removed. It may also be helpful to tumble dry your clothes in the dryer on high heat to kill the ticks. In addition to checking your clothes, you should also examine your gear. Finally, it's especially important to check your body for ticks after being outdoors. A full body check should be completed upon returning from potentially tick-infested areas. A mirror may be necessary to view all portions of your body. Showering is a good idea and may help wash off unattached ticks. Ticks can be very small, so you should be thorough. It's also good to check your pets because they can bring ticks back into the home. You should use a tick prevention product prescribed by your veterinarian. Conduct tick checks daily, removing any that are present, and watch your pet closely. Rickettsia phillipi has an incubation period of 3 to 14 days, so changes in behavior is something to watch out for if you suspect that your pet has been bitten by a tick. Tick-proofing your yard is also important. You should keep your grass short, clear away any leaves, and stack wood tightly in a dry place. If none of these work, you may want to apply pesticides outdoors. March through May are peak months for the vector Dermacentor occidentalis, so then it would be the best time to use it. Removing a tick as soon as possible decreases your chance of infection. First, you should use tweezers to grab the tick as close to the skin surface as possible. Second, you should pull upward with a steady, even pressure, making sure not to twist or jerk the tick, because this can cause the mouthparts to break off and stain the skin. If this occurs, you should try to remove the mouthparts with the tweezers. Finally, after removing the tick, you should clean the area with soap and water or rubbing alcohol. If a rash develops within several weeks of removal, you should see your doctor. Two methods that go beyond personal protection include acaricides and bait boxes. Bait boxes are designed to attract rodents, which are hosts of Dermacentor occidentalis, and can transmit Rickettsia phillipi to other ticks. There are two forms of bait boxes. In one, wild rodents are attracted to a bait housed within a container open at one or both ends. Upon entry, their fur becomes coated with pesticide, leave the fur those tick ectoparasites. Other bait boxes are filled with cotton that have been treated with the pesticide. The rodents will remove the cotton and bring it to their nest, which can also kill the ticks directly. The boxes are installed to disrupt the tick's life cycle at crucial stages across the season. In May, the boxes kill off nymphs. In late July and early August, they kill larvae. The pros of bait boxes are that they can significantly reduce the prevalence of ticks, and according to research, bait boxes are unlikely to attract additional pests. CDC also says that boxes are child resistant. Only rodents and other critters can enter, but your child's hands and fingers can't. The cons of bait boxes are that they do take longer than other management methods, like spraying, because they focus on the nymphs and the larval stages as opposed to the egg-laying adults. Additionally, the price of one box can be expensive, around $50. If you need 2 installations during the year for a large yard, that would be 8 boxes, nearly costing $800. In the Pacific Coast, Dermacentor occidentalis' seasonal activity peaks around March through May, so the bait boxes should be placed around then. These should be placed around the perimeter of your property. Although costly, the results are promising. A study done by the Journal of Medical Entomology found that these can reduce tick populations by roughly 97% over the course of 2 years. The second method is acaricide spray. In the Pacific Coast, the best time for an area-wide acaricide application is in the late spring, mid-May through mid-June, when the ticks are in their nymphal stage, although another application can be done in the fall to target adult ticks. This can be done with aerial sprays over fields and yards. Pros include the fact that it's quicker and an effective method to kill ticks. Also, this method can be used at a greater scale and can treat acres of land at a time. Some cons include to the acaricides, and the fact that these pesticides are also toxic to other insect pests and non-pests. Acaricides can be applied to tick habitants around residents, including wooded areas and their borders, stone walls, and gardens. They could also be sprayed alongside popular hiking trails in California.